Welcome back to Outdoors with Larry Ray on 790 The Bet. Brought to you proudly by the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and Wally Hatchett's Comfort Food and Drinks at 6439 Summer Avenue.
Hey, welcome back to Outdoors with Larry Ray on this July 23rd. As I told you, we're going to kind of step away from Orlando a little bit. Bill Cooksey has been down there at ICAST, but at the same time, we've had some really interesting developments since a bill was introduced back in June the 22nd that has stirred up a lot of, I would say, comment, whether it's social media or whether it just might be friends talking to friends. And then Bill pointed this out to me about the H.R. 8167 bill, which a lot of people have called it. What's the name of it? They're calling it the
Return Act.
The Return Act. And I know that Bill is following this, and you need to listen to Bill's his podcast. And I'm going to put in a plug for that, Bill, because it's a pretty fast 90 minutes with you and your buddy on there talking about current topics. And this is a really hot topic, and it's so hot that they even brought in Mike Butler.
That's right.
To add to it, because
big guns.
Yeah, and of course our friend Mike Butler, Chief Executive Officer for the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, sent out a press release to all of us guys in the media, and when I saw it and I read it from Mike, and he emphatically said, we got to stop this thing. So I got Bill Cooksey, of course, co-host of the show today, and Mike Butler on with us this morning. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing okay for an old man with all sorts of things going, but this kind of sets my temperature rising. I don't know if I should read this before I go to the doctor or not, but, he might not let me in. I know my pulse rate goes up, but Bill, talk to us about this a little bit, and then we'll let Mike jump in here.
Well, sure. We definitely want Mike to do most of the talking because he's been so engaged in conservation for so long, especially in the state of Tennessee, where he understands how Pittman-Robertson works and what it does for the state. And this same thing applies to Mississippi and Arkansas and Kentucky. I know there are listeners that we kind of bleed off into those states. So Pittman-Robertson, I believe I'm correct, it's been around 85 years. I definitely want Mike to touch on it. The one good thing about this whole deal, it is giving us the opportunity to reconnect with sportsmen about this so they understand what Pittman-Robertson is, where it came from, and what it does. And too many of us just go about our daily lives and kind of don't pay attention to the things that allow us to do the things we love to do. And that's what Pittman-Robertson does. So I'd like to get right over to Mike and just, if he can give us a real just quick rundown of Pittman-Robertson, how long it's been around, how it works, and what it does for Tennessee.
Yeah, Mike, go for it.
Sure. Be glad to. So I'm going to broaden the scope a little bit because this bill that we're talking about really impacts a couple of different pieces of legislation that are almost identical in how they operate.
Yes.
One you're going to hear me talk about is Pittman-Robertson, which was passed in 1937. And that places an excise tax of 10% at the wholesale level on firearms, ammunition, archery tackle, and a handful of other associated items that are associated with hunting. On the fisheries side, there's a bill called Dingell-Johnson that was passed in 1952. It follows the same model. It places an excise tax at the wholesale level on fishing gear and equipment. And this bill, the Return Act that's been filed, would impact both of these. But long and short, these two pieces of federal legislation have produced the revenue that has been the fuel for the recovery of our wildlife species and fish species that are hunted and fished for across the country. And so that basis and that background, the reason why we always talk about sportsmen are the biggest conservationists is because we pay for most of the conservation that takes place in the United States. And that comes through these two funds. And the way it works is that fund, those dollars are collected at the federal level. And at the federal level, there is a formula that is based on how many licenses are sold on each state and the geographic scale and size of each state amongst the two biggest driving forces. And so Tennessee will get an apportionment from Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson every federal budget year. This past year, the state's PR apportionment was $31 million and some change.
Yeah.
And its Dingell-Johnson apportionment was about $8 million and some change.
Okay.
So on a $90 to $95 million budget at the Wildlife Agency, roughly 40% of it came from Pittman-Robertson and Dingell-Johnson. And that's money that sportsmen are paying, being passed on, I'm sure, to retailers. In some cases, it may not be.
Yes.
But it's paid one time at the wholesale level, and then we use our license dollars to leverage that. And so it pays for things like habitat work, public hunting lands, aquatic habitat work, and fishing opportunities and fishing access, things like that.
And even a lot of public ranges now.
Well,
that's true.
Yes. Yeah.
I can think of at least 6 off the top of my head. Montgomery County shooting range, Lone Oaks Farm range at the Clays here in West Tennessee where y'all are. I believe Carroll County range received some PR funding.
Yeah.
There's another one over by Paris that's received some funding in West Tennessee, and then there's several in East Tennessee, Greene County, Crossville, a handful of others, some upgrades at Henry Horton. There's probably been $10 to $12 million spent on upgrading shooting ranges across the state using these dollars.
And I think people understand as we get into this thing in a little bit why I brought that up.
Well, yeah, also because, I know where you're coming from, and we got 2 segments on this. And, again, we're talking to Mike Butler, Chief Executive Officer for the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and, of course, our own Bill Cooksey with Vanishing Paradise of the National Wildlife Federation. And I don't know, did this come out of the blue when Representative Andrew Clyde of Georgia presented this bill on the 22nd? I know, Mike, you really stay in touch with people. Was this, I mean, this just couldn't happen overnight, so these guys have undoubtedly been doing all their work, but I don't know if they expected the hailfire and brimstone
I think
we've gotten.
The short answer is no. They've been talking about this for a couple of years, to my estimation. Here in Tennessee, you've got Barrett Firearms, which is the owner of Barrett, Ronnie Barrett, has been supporting this legislation. And Mr. Clyde in Georgia had talked to some of our friends in Georgia more than a year ago, saying that he didn't like this. And his claim, if you read the media around this bill, his claim is that this is an impingement upon the Second Amendment right.
Yeah.
Well, there are a couple of counter arguments to that I'll just mention briefly. Number one, this excise tax has had zero impact on the sale of firearms. Sale of firearms has set record highs each year the last several years.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's been an upward trajectory for decades. And so you can't argue that this is preventing anybody from acquiring firearms legally for legal purposes. The other thing I would mention is this. I would argue that if, he is in the firearms retail business.
Yes, he is.
So it gives the appearance of a conflict of interest, which I think is of concern to voters.
Yes.
Not only is it an appearance of it, there might actually be right on the fringe of an actual conflict. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But if you think of it even further, Larry, if he's so concerned about having people exercise their Second Amendment right and have access to firearms, I would question that his price on his firearms is higher than his competitors. And I would argue that charging people money for firearms is probably a bigger impingement than a 10% tax.
Yes.
And so maybe he should just be giving some away.
Well, I've been around this a long time in what I do, and at the same time, I haven't heard anybody really complain about putting in money to Pittman Robertson, and the DJ funding at the same time. And so this comes as Bill was saying, and Bill, you talk to people a lot about this in your podcast. Tell us a little bit about what transpired in your podcast. And then, of course, we're going to get in some other organizations, as Mike knows, have been very vocal. And, of course, Mike, the press release from the Tennessee Wildlife Federation sums it all up. We strongly oppose this bill. And I like that you got strongly in italics, Mike, so we can pick up the gist of that. But Bill, from your perspective and working with conservation groups and things along that line, what was the response to your podcast when you guys not only had Mike on? Only got 2 minutes. I don't know if Bill can sum that up in 2 minutes. Can you, Mike? Can you, Bill? Well, have we lost Bill, Mike? Did you?
Okay, I'm here. I'm here. I'm
okay.
sorry. I had silenced my phone to keep some noise from bleeding through.
That's okay.
The response to the podcast,
yes,
it's been overwhelming. I mean, podcasts, some of them do well, some don't, and this one is getting shared everywhere. Which,
yes.
Thank goodness, and this is a good chance to educate some folks and just bring them up to speed on PR, and also what the attack on it. One thing I've learned, and listening to a friend's podcast who actually interviewed this representative, the guy did not talk to any stakeholders. He didn't talk to game and fish agencies. He didn't talk to conservation groups. He did not even talk to the NRA or NSSF before he did this. He just started writing off the top of his head, is the best I can tell.
Well, some of the sponsors are actually supported by NRA before this came out. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back with more conversation with Mike Butler and Bill Cooksey on this hot subject. It's called the Return Act, but here it is. It's calling Repealing Excess Tax on Unalienable Rights Now. Golly, no wonder they call it the Return Act, okay?
I call it stupid.
And Mike can't call it what he wants to call it right now. All right.
I've got another choice word.
Yeah, we got a 10-second delay here. All right, let's take a break and come back with more talk with Mike and Bill on this Bill on Bill. We'll be right back.